Hello. Welcome to the Beyond Baba Yaga podcast, where I will attempt to reimagine the crone archetype to take the fear out of living child-free. I'm Josie, and today I'm joined by Fee. Hi, Fee.
Hi, Josie.
Thanks so much for being here.
That's lovely. It's very exciting.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. We've had an initial chat on the phone, and I feel like we covered a lot of stuff there.
We did.
So I feel like we've got a good range of topics around being child-free that are quite nice and meaty. So thank you for being up for having a chat with me. I know you, of course, through your role as organiser of Bristol Childfree Women's MeetUps. Could you tell me, how did your involvement with that come about, and what's the purpose of the MeetUp groups?
So I moved to Bristol, 11 or 12 years ago now, and MeetUp was just becoming a thing. I found this group called Bristol Childfree Women and thought, that's a thing. Oh, wow, like, I'm one of those. So I joined it and nothing happened. There were no events. And then the person who originally set it up sent a really heartfelt message to everybody in the group saying, I love this group. It's been brilliant. And I thought I could keep it going, but I moved to Oxford.
Oh,
so
not exactly local.
No. So she put out an appeal if anybody was prepared to take it on. And I'm the kind of person that puts my hand up for this sort of thing. So I put my hand up and sort of 11 years or so later, still officially at the helm, although I'm by no means the only organiser. So we are first and foremost a physical, in real life meetup group.
Yeah, which for me is so important. Having been to those events and having done a lot of online events in various different capacities as well, the difference it makes sharing the space, sharing energy with people and being able to look in people's eyes, all of that sort of airy-fairy stuff is actually a really big deal, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and we had to be mindful that some people prefer that face-to-face interface. Some people are more comfortable in a more virtual interface. But, we started as a in real life group. Whilst we had to go online during the pandemic, we're now back to being predominantly all face-to-face. And it fulfills a number of functions, really. First of all, as a general, taking social media to actually translate into the real world. If you're new to Bristol, we're always organising things.
Yeah.
They're fun things that women might like to do. Particularly women who, let's face it, don't need a babysitter.
Yeah.
And I find that we get a lot of people join either when they're new to Bristol.
Yes, that's true for me.
Yes, absolutely. So you're new to the city, who can I hang out with? Maybe you're a little bit older. If you're in your 20s, there are plenty of people around to go out and, do stuff with through other meetup groups and similar things. But maybe if you're in your 30s and you haven't got that automatic network to make friends when you arrive somewhere that maybe somebody who is parenting might have, like the school gates. You find your peers of your age are meeting friends with their children. It's like, well, how do I meet friends in a new city?
Completely.
We also get people join us when they suddenly look around and realise the last one of their core group of friends has just fallen pregnant.
Yeah.
And suddenly the gravity drops that their friends are probably still their friends. It's not like we suddenly stop being friends with people because they become parents. But there are some practical sides that challenge your relationship. So our friends who are in the early years of raising small people quite rightfully have their hands full.
Completely.
They're not as available.
No.
And we might still want to be going out and doing things that they quite frankly don't have the energy or the space for. They might value other things about their friendships with us. But if you've chosen to be child-free, it's a bit of a shock when you realise that, nobody's around to go to the theatre with anymore or go out for drinks with. So there's that side of it. And there's also a side that it's not that at every meetup we all have deep, meaningful conversations about what it means to be child-free, but sometimes people do want to do that. And it's great to have a space where people aren't talking about nappies and school arrangements, but they maybe are talking about things that actually you've found to be a challenge, or just interesting conversation that doesn't revolve around raising children. Because if you are raising children, it's pretty central to what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
And if you're not, I think it can sometimes be, hard to relate to friends when your lives become so different.
Yeah, like you say, and actually we talked about it when we first spoke on the phone, how the two sort of pivotal moments of making friends in adulthood are going to university and connecting with people through that, and then having children and then connecting through children. And if that is removed, we still need to find ways to connect with people. And if you're like me and not the sort of person who has designated hobbies, and there are plenty of us out there, and it's nothing to be ashamed of, who just like to do things like chatting, having a glass of wine, watching a film, maybe reading books and talking about those. It's really still really important to be able to share those activities with other people, I think, all the way through our adult lives, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. I remember sitting in the Royal Oak on Gloucester Road, and I was waiting for two girlfriends. And there was this massive group of women next to me, about 10, 12 of them, and they were having a scream. They were having such a laugh. They were ordering food, and they were having drinks, and they were obviously having a brilliant time. And I remember sort of sitting there and sort of feeling a little bit outside and a little bit othered and thinking, oh, why don't I have a big group of friends like that? And then I tuned into what they were talking about, and they all had kids at the same school.
Yeah.
And a lot of their conversation was about whether the homework was appropriate and which teacher was doing what, and, sort of school and child related and, really meaningful conversation. I don't want to at all diminish the importance of having children is hard work, and having other people around you in the same boat, in the same storm to share those experiences with is really important. But I just had this sudden moment of thinking, oh, yeah, like I kind of want some of this. I want to have this big group of friends, but I don't fit in there.
Yeah.
That isn't my tribe. And I think moments like that really reinforce to me why it's so important that we have this group.
Yeah.
And people tell me how important it is. And that's really motivating to make sure that we keep it going and we keep it alive.
Completely, because that's us forging our own tribe with our own shared experience, which is that, and like you say, it's just different, equally valid and equally important, just completely different direction. I would really love to know the numbers on when you first got involved in the MeetUp group 10 years ago or so to now, because I feel like the numbers must have increased exponentially, right?
Yes, they have. So when I joined, we had about 150 members.
Yeah.
And we did at one point wonder whether all of them were active and whether we could possibly whittle the numbers down if we went through and maybe took people out of the group who hadn't been to anything for over 2 years, because MeetUp charges more money if you've got over 100 members. So that's the sort of size we're in.
Yeah.
We now have 950 members on MeetUp and 950 on Facebook. And there's a significant overlap, but there are some people who are on one platform but not the other.
Yeah.
So let's call it 1,000 people.
Wow.
And I can't guarantee that all of them are still child-free or still active in the group, but those numbers have built up.
Yeah.
Some of that has just been, I think, as people come out of lockdown and we get more used to using apps like MeetUp and Facebook to build our social circles.
Yeah.
Some of it is because I and a few others in the group have got involved in a few BBC articles and radio interviews and starting to sort of raise this awareness. So I know a lot of people have found us through those. And also the media is turning quite a lot of attention on child freeness. We've had some press in the last year around our birth rate falling in the UK and what that might mean from a fiscal point of view. So I think that sort of raised the consciousness generally.
Yeah.
And through that, people have discovered that there's this thing, Bristol Childfree Women. It'd be really interesting, and I'm not sure how I would know this, to work out whether that's because more people genuinely are choosing to be child-free or whether just because more people have found us. Who knows?
Yeah, it's still fantastic numbers, though. I'm so pleased and impressed because that, as a tribe, that's pretty impressive to be just in one city, a tribe of nearly 1,000 people. I'm proud to be part of it.
It is cool.
When we spoke on the phone, you told me about recently completing your psychology degree. Can you explain to me a bit more about to what extent historically the experience of being a child-free woman has been pathologised in psychological studies? Because I had no idea about this until you mentioned it.
Absolutely. And I haven't gone into the literature really deeply.
No,
but
just an idiot's guide is perfect for me.
So basically, women without children, if we go back to the 19th century, if you chose not to have children, you were clearly mad. You were clearly not performing your feminine role. And if you were bucking that standard, then there must be something wrong with you. Most of the research that I looked at when we got to it in my degree, so we had a module on the family.
Yeah.
Which covered all sorts of things from sort of human sexuality, different forms of relationships, and the family unit and issues with the family unit. We talked about things like family estrangement and then child-freeness. And there was an explosion of research in this in the 60s and 70s because for the first time, women were actually able to exercise their wish to remain child-free if they wanted to more easily because we had birth control. So this sort of sudden fascination. And when you look at papers from that era, the term that stood out for me is deviant. Child-free women are described as being deviant.
I know. That's what you said on the phone. I loved it and hated it so much at the same time.
Exactly. On the one hand, in a very literal sense, that just means you're deviating from the societal norm.
Yep.
For that period in time, and society norms do change.
Of course.
Okay, but at the point that research was done, you are deviating from a norm. It could be seen as deviant, as in there's something wrong with you, you're sort of being deliberately underhand. There's that air to it. But there's also a we're deviant. Well, that's quite exciting, isn't it? Like, we're deviating.
Completely.
Yes.
It makes you feel sort of rebellious, doesn't it?
Exactly. So I found that quite amusing. Some of that early research really focused on almost like taking a sort of psychodynamic Freudian approach. What could have gone wrong in somebody's childhood that as a woman they don't want to have children? So almost like an assumption that either you haven't somehow reconciled your own sexuality and role as a woman, or that you've somehow been exposed to some kind of horrific trauma, which may happen.
Sure.
I'm not ruling out that we can sometimes get to this decision because of our experiences, which may or may not have been traumatic, but almost like looking for the cause. Like what is the reason why you're child-free, and almost looking for it as a sort of a causal relationship.
Yeah.
When we start getting into the late 90s and early noughties, queer research starts to come into the picture. Because, of course, same-sex couples are expected to be child-free.
Yeah, of course.
And there's a really interesting twist that you start to see the research shift from a pronatalist stance and why aren't these women having children to almost these people shouldn't be having children. Or should they? And queer studies then starting to challenge some of those assumptions. So it's really interesting. And I've only really experienced pronatalism. I've experienced people question and want to know why I don't want children and try and convince me. My hairdresser today, despite the fact I'm 49 years old, he knows how much grey hair I've got because he's just been covering it up for me. So I said what I was doing this afternoon, and he said, it's not too late for you, Fee. You fall in love, you could have kids. And I'm like, well, I am in love. I'm in a loving relationship.
Yeah.
Loving relationship and kids don't have to come together.
No.
When you come to the more contemporary research, there's a lot about exploring it as how do you derive purpose? What motivates the decision not to have children from a more of a sort of positive psychology lens, as in why would you be drawn towards it rather than what you're running away from?
Yeah.
So there's a much more positivist sort of frame around things. So it's really interesting seeing that evolution.
Yeah.
And sort of pairing that up with the choices that our mothers would or wouldn't have had and generations before that. And then for me now, as a 49-year-old, I'm seeing women in their 20s joining the group. Essentially, they're the generation now below me.
Yeah.
So starting to see that generational shift, as society's expectations have shifted, what we pathologise has to shift as well. It becomes part of our normal range.
Yeah.
And what I'm really enjoying is hopefully we're getting to a point where it's just a lifestyle choice. It's just part of our normal range of human behaviour, that just as we wouldn't expect every woman to go out there and be a nurse, because, of course, all women have that nursing, nurturing thing. Of course we do.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a foregone conclusion, actually, how we're going to spend our lives, how we're going to create purpose in our lives. And I do believe, personally, there is something important about giving something and giving back to society. But there are many ways to do that are not necessarily directly bearing and raising your own children.
Completely. And it could be argued that one of the greatest gifts that a person could give to society right now would be to not bring an additional person into it.
Yes. Now, this isn't research, but when people join the group, I do ask a few questions about, what do you love most about being child-free? What's important to you? What would you like to get out of the group? And more I'm hearing people talk about issues like the environment, overpopulation of the planet, personal fiscal reasons. Actually, it's so expensive to raise a child, it's expensive to live anyway. Worries about the state of society and whether you want to bring children into that. And also a much more acute awareness of your own mental health and your own physical health.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really invisible to people who haven't sort of really spent any time with anybody who's child-free is how many people choose to be child-free for really good protective reasons around either their physical or their mental health.
Yeah.
So things are definitely shifting. And environmentally, do we want to bring more children into the world? Do we want to bring children into the world if we recognise that we are not best resourced to be able to raise them? Actually, is it not more responsible to take a decision not to?
Yeah.
Not that we should be limited by anything, but if you self-recognise that actually maybe you're not resourced to be able to raise children, well, why would we put pressure under people to perform a role that actually, if you're not going into it with your eyes wide open, willingly and with, real desire to want to do it, can actually be quite damaging.
Completely.
So I think there's that sort of side that tends to get overlooked. It's almost, somehow you can be convinced and also, automatically you must be able to do this thing and you must have the resources within you.
Yeah.
It's the cliche thing about we scrutinise people's ability to take on a puppy more than their ability to raise a child. I've talked a lot there, but there's a lot in there.
Also, I think one of the things we talked about, you mentioned about the puppy, it's actually anyone can have a child, but the process of getting a puppy is so difficult. It feels like everyone I know who wants to get a puppy for some ridiculous reason, like the fencing isn't quite secure enough in their garden, isn't able to adopt one or whatever, because they're obviously really rigorous. But literally anyone can go out and have children, and that's just fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you go and get a puppy, you're doing it deliberately. It's unlikely a puppy's just going to arrive on your doorstep one morning. One of the things that I find quite curious is that a lot of and I'm going to say people, not just women, but the people I speak to who have chosen not to have children, probably women especially, I think, have given it a lot of thought. Because you are choosing something that's atypical for society's norm, there's a lot of thought normally gone into it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that people don't put a lot of thought into wanting to be parents, but also, it is quite easy to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And suddenly find yourself pregnant.
Yeah.
And then after finding out you're pregnant, kind of ask the questions about, oh my goodness, are we or am I resourced to be able to raise this child? So I think there's that sort of lack of premeditation. And what I'm noticing is to choose something that is counter, you're forced to explore your own reasons.
Yeah.
One of the things I love to ask people when they say, oh, why have you chosen not to have children? Why haven't you had children? You say, well, why did you?
Yeah.
Why did you have your children? Oh, well, that's just what you do. It's like, well, that sounds like a pretty weak reason to me.
Completely.
Like, you're signing up for a 20-year job minimum with no probation period, no get-out clause, and you just did it just because that's what you do. And even when people say, oh, I really wanted to, that sentence still starts with, I really wanted. So it suggests a bit of agency has to be there, and that you're also getting something out of it. I wanted something out of having a child.
Well, fundamentally, the only person getting anything out of it is the parents, really, in the sense of we don't know that the child's going to get anything out of it, because before a child is born, we have no idea what their quality of life is going to be like for a number of reasons, not through anyone else's fault. But when making the decision to have children, it can only ever be a selfish one, really, because there's no element of saving anything, because nothing exists at that point.
Yes, although I understand that lots of people feel like it's almost a duty. That's just what I'm expected to do, or an expectation. So I think that's true if somebody has had free choice and thought about it. What's shocked me, actually, going back to university, so I'm sitting there as a mature student surrounded by 19 and 20-year-olds. And when we had the lecture on child-free lives, which was wonderful because we had the privilege of having a lecturer who has actually researched this area, Nikki Hayfield. I sat on a group discussion table with 4 young women, and the first thing that one of them said when we opened up our discussion at our table was, "Oh, I never really thought about it being a choice." And that really shocked me.
Yeah.
You're 20. I could understand that with my generation. Maybe that wouldn't be the case now. Taylor Swift has spoken about it so vocally and made a feature of Childfree Cat Lady. But yeah, that was just really shocking that actually somebody who's of a generation that I would expect to be much more switched on to the idea of personal choice, and actually, our expectations in terms of gender, we can talk about whether gender's a construction or not, but those ideas are created by society. Some of it will be natural urge, but if you don't have that natural urge, then you do have choice.
Yeah, of course. So that 20-year-old sounds like their thinking in the modern world is quite traditional and is still reflective of those kind of old-fashioned idea of the family, children being very important, gift from God, service to God, growing the congregation, etc. It reminds me of that anyway, like, don't even look sideways, this is just what my destiny is.
Absolutely. And that might be modelled by her family as well.
Yeah.
I think family examples of child-freeness or not are really important. But that sort of leads on to, I was raised Church of England. I went to church. I was a choir girl. I don't go to church now. So I guess I don't move in circles where that Christian mandate is still prevalent. But what I do notice in the group is that we have, Bristol, fortunately, is a very accepting multicultural city. I see it in all sorts of different groups. I see women from Poland who are horrified by what they're seeing back home in terms of far right-wing politics. And I've heard people say things like, I could never actually go back to Poland because we're only one step away from banning contraception there.
Oh, really?
So abortion has been banned. It's
I
going
had
down
no
a really
idea.
far
Oh, so
right.
it's kind of gone back. Yeah. They had progressed so far, and then they've now actively taken decisions to regress, as it were.
Absolutely. And we're seeing far-right politics all over Europe. And of course, in the US, that sort of whole idea of trad wives and, all this kind of thing, which is all, if you actually look into what a traditional wife actually really means, it's all a construct. It's hilarious. But yeah, so you see that. I've talked to members in the group who are from maybe an Indian or Asian background. In fact, one very good friend who I made through the group, who was a surgeon. So both her parents were doctors. She'd obviously been sent to top universities to come to the UK to be a surgeon. And at the age of 31, suddenly her mum starts nagging her, when are you going to marry? When are you going to have children? And it's almost this whole idea like, okay, so you've invested in my education and you've pushed me into a profession, a career.
Yeah.
But now you want me to suddenly just trade all that and get married and produce grandchildren for you. So there's sort of expectation from older generations. And, I think it's easy to sort of see that in people from a Muslim faith as well. I've been challenged by taxi drivers before now over,
really?
Why aren't you married? Well, we haven't got married, but I'm in a partnership. And when you're going to have children, well, I'm not going to have children. They just can't comprehend because the whole of their social structure is organised around that you get married and then your wife will have your children and she will raise them and you will have a certain amount of control over the household. So it's very interesting seeing different points of social evolution playing out through people from different cultures that are at different places of acceptance or accommodation of all sorts of lifestyle choices that might not be that kind of nuclear family traditional religious
constructs.
Yeah,
like you say.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when we talked before, and I shared with you my motivation for the podcast, which was that all I want is for choosing to be child-free to be considered equally vital and valuable as choosing to be a parent. I just want the one to have as much clout as the other. And then when we were talking, I think you sort of stripped it back a little bit further and said that actually what society really needs to do is to be able to recognise and celebrate the experience of just a person, an individual, being complete and whole and perfect just as a single unit, without the need for a partner or child or children to complete their life.
If that's what that person chooses, absolutely. I mean, we live in an individualistic society in the West anyway, compared with other social structures. But we should be able to choose. And I think there's a worrying, if you don't have children, then you need to find a purpose. You need to find some reason to exist, because a lot of people express their reason for being through, well, you know, one of my greatest lifetime achievements will be raising my kids.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, I was on a Radio 5 live interview where the broadcaster hadn't been able to have children. And he was very vulnerable in exposing that he'd questioned his purpose in life, because he always thought he would raise a family, and that hadn't been able to happen. So I think that can put us in a position where we sort of maybe need to find some kind of focus or purpose or something we're adding to society that is sort of instead of having children. And I think that might be more important if you had imagined that you would have had children. So if you come through a more of a childless route, and then found your way to child-free, and then gone, but hang on, you know, I'm okay with the idea now that I'm not going to have children. I have a good life. Maybe I'm in a relationship, maybe I'm not. But like, what actually is my life purpose? It can be a really wonderful journey, or I've seen it create quite a bit of distress for people, and almost this idea that I'm not a valuable member of society if I've not had children. So we need to kind of create space for people to be able to explore purpose that isn't having children, but also at the same time, you kind of don't need to have a big life purpose. It's not like everybody who doesn't have children needs to find a cure for cancer or do great charitable works, or, you know, like, we shouldn't feel like we have to. We can actually just exist and be a good human, and not cause harm.
That's good enough.
Exactly. So I think that's one of the lovely things that younger members of the group have really challenged me on. You know, as I said, I've gone through this phase of thinking, well, what is my purpose then? What do I give back to society if I'm not raising kids? I feel like I need to do something a bit altruistic. I need to do something that gives, or certainly maybe express the nurturing side of my personality. But just not through raising my own children. I mean, we have so many women in the group. It's hilarious, who are teachers, who work in nurseries, who are child psychologists, who are social workers. So there is that. But actually also, if you having a happy, fulfilled life is exploring your interests, reading, studying, we don't need to have that big purpose. We don't need to justify our existence.
No, we don't need to create something as big as a child. You know what I mean? We don't need to create I didn't create a child, but instead I created this other very important and quite sizable thing.
Exactly.
And it is, I think, really easy to put pressure on oneself to think, well, if it's not one, then it must be the other. Just kind of floating through life, experiencing and enjoying everything it has to offer can sometimes feel a bit inadequate. But there's absolutely no reason for it to be inadequate at all, because, like you say, it all comes down to what makes that individual feel happy and fulfilled. And if that is inventing something, fantastic. And if that is just waking up each day, being in the present and seeing what the day offers,
absolutely,
just as good.
So I work as a leadership coach, and one of the things sometimes that I explore with my clients is, you know, we are human beings, not human doings. It's not about what we do. Just by being, we have value. You know, when I'm talking to somebody who maybe is struggling with imposter syndrome, which is the same sort of, it's almost like there's a child-free imposter syndrome. If I haven't done children, then maybe I should be doing something else, you know, to be enough.
Yeah.
And actually, we are human beings. Just being can be enough, and valuing what we have around us. And, I think there's something innate in the human psyche where we do want to grow and develop ourselves. Certainly the positive psychologists would say there is, that we the ultimate is self-actualization. But that can be expressed in so many different ways.
So I work for a company that makes natural history TV, but I had absolutely no idea until you told me that humans are one of only very few animals for whom the lifespan of the females far exceeds their reproductive life. And that, to me, suggests that nature recognises and needs women to serve as more than just mothers for the survival of the species. What do you think about that?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Orcas, humans, and some of the big primates, menopause. Most mammals don't menopause. Most mammals are capable of producing young, the males and the females, right until they die. If you take a pure Darwinian view that actually we exist to ensure the perpetuation of our genetic material, which is the frame for sexual selection, then why would you justify life beyond reproductive periods? And the grandmother hypothesis is based in the idea that actually those older females actually perform a really valuable function, that they support the tribe or the troop or the pod, and they provide support and wisdom and part of that societal structure around the females who are raising young. And actually, when you look at gorilla troops, you see that they will look after each other's young, they will babysit each other's kids. In bonobos, which are very similar to a chimpanzee, we don't have them in zoos because they basically have sex a lot. They kind of have sex as a way of saying hello. So
kids don't need to see that.
Exactly. You don't want a whole class of 6-year-olds in front of a
rutting couple.
Absolutely. But bonobos have a matriarchal society, and those matriarchs have a very valuable role. But even in patriarchal big ape societies, the alpha female has this caretaking role. And I think about things like, cultures where medicine women, older women, women with wisdom, the women who people turn to. So we got this sort of idea of that generationally, women still have value beyond their childbirth. I mean, I'm in menopause right now. I'm doing the whole thing where I'm getting really angry about things in the world, and it sounds cliche, but we, angry women of a certain age do fight for justice and and fight for things to change. And for me, when I lift that idea up and bring it to choosing not to have children and being without children in a younger phase of your life, it's really the same thing going on, that actually society maybe needs adults who are not involved directly in raising the next generation, who can provide other richness to our society. You see this in research about examples of animals that may be gay, or the two female albatross that get together to raise a chick together when one of them has lost a chick or lost a partner.
Yeah.
So we've got all these kind of examples. And I think that, I'm not saying that it's a direct comparative template for being child-free, but I think it just opens up the idea that actually a rounded society has got plenty of space for not everybody to be involved in raising the next generation. I realise I may be contradicting my idea of, we don't have to have a purpose, but actually maybe we do have a purpose. It adds a bit of diversity. It gives maybe light relief to some of those people who are raising families. Back to, we have teachers, we have social workers in the group who, are able to really care about the kids under their care, but maybe from a different standpoint.
Yeah.
Or maybe, if anybody out there has got the auntie that didn't have children but was actually the really cool auntie.
Yeah, and taught them loads.
Exactly. And I think there's something quite exciting and liberating about thinking about society in that way, and seeing that, again, it's back to that question of value, that, we don't have to be out there doing great deeds to have value, but actually just by being a member of society who's doing something different, who isn't involved in raising young, but is actually adding something to the fabric of society, is really quite exciting and uplifting.
Yeah, completely. And I think, like you say, sometimes the term purpose can feel like quite a heavy cross to bear, like it's a big thing. But on a smaller level, or perhaps a more digestible level, just having a small role to fill of, for example, just being able to be role modelling a certain way of living. I've come across this new term of being free range rather than child free, which I just love so much. And it makes me imagine myself as a chicken, which is also quite fun. But even just, I think, to be living the role, modelling to the adults in my life and the children in my life of living as an independent woman, following whatever path I wish to. That's not specifically a purpose, but it's still kind of, I feel like I'm doing something that is impacting and affecting other people potentially in a positive way.
The reality is, though, some people would be threatened by that. I mentioned Taylor Swift earlier, but Taylor Swift is a great example. Again, at uni, surrounded by Swifties. She really has been out there, as a very visible figure, pointing a stick at misogyny, at the different ways that young women are treated compared with young men. I'm not saying that young men have an ideal situation anymore. They are also being effed by the patriarchy in their own way. But, we got a strong figure like that. But for a lot of people, that is really threatening to their sense of what society should look like. Again, back to, if you are a bit more right-wing, a bit more traditional, that's a really threatening thing. What to us is modelling being a good, loving person, being accepting of people of different sexualities, different identities, different cultures, to people who maybe hold that more traditional view very close to their hearts. That's quite threatening. Yeah, it's a really interesting tension that we've got going on there.
Yeah, it is. And I love the side that I'm on.
Yeah, I still think it's just back to there's room for all of us.
Yes, exactly. I should be promoting harmony rather than we're both standing on either sides of a line with our hands on our hips. Fee, you've shared with me the social challenges of being a child-free woman now living in a village compared to when you were living in Bristol City. What do you do to actively invest in maintaining your free-range lifestyle now that you're a bit more rural?
Yes, it's been really interesting because Bristol is a very accepting city. And with the numbers in the group and the scale of Bristol, it's been very easy for me to curate a life that just feels very comfortably child-free. It also helps that, my hobbies are things like road cycling, which if there are women doing road cycling, they normally have a bit of time in their hands. Although I do know some mums who road cycle, but it can be a bit more challenging. So ever since I've been in Bristol, I've sort of collected around me. Obviously I have older friends who I've known for a long time, I have children, but most of the friends I've acquired in this time are in a similar boat. So it was a bit of a shock to move into a small village, very similar to the village I grew up in. And sort of, there's all these women around and you want to make friends with people and you walk into the pub and then it becomes very obvious that, do you have children? Oh, mine are these ages. And suddenly thinking, I'd forgotten what this was like.
Yeah.
It's almost like I've surrounded myself so much with people who are in the same sort of boat that I'd sort of almost forgotten that most women my age are navigating raising teenagers.
Yeah.
So what do I do? Well, the first thing is tonight I've got another child-free event. Wednesday, a whole group of us, 12 of us, we saw Jane Austen abridged, 2 hours of the entire collection of Jane Austen in 2 hours. It was brilliant at the Armour Theatre. So obviously keeping things going in the group. And what I tend to find myself doing is making connections with people who tend to be either side of having children. So either they're child-free or they've not had children yet, or they've kind of done that.
Yeah.
They've come out the other side. And also discovering that there are one or two people in the village who don't have children. You know, it's not unanimous. One of my good friends in the village, she hasn't got children, not by choice. And they can be really interesting friendships because, you know, there's a point when if you weren't able to have children, it's painful. You're going through a grieving process effectively for the life that you thought you were going to have.
Yeah.
And you need to redefine yourself if you had defined yourself in terms of the assumption you'd be having children. And I think there's a really nice kind of symbiotic relationship where, you know, it's like, well, how are these women who have chosen to have children, how are they doing life? How are they navigating this?
Yeah.
So sort of developing some of those friendships as well. And the next thing will be actually organising a meet-up event in Weston-super-Mare or in somewhere like Cheddar.
Brilliant.
Because we do have a few people south of Bristol, because I'm sure they are there.
Yeah.
Just a bit hidden.
Yeah, of course they are. We're everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
We're ubiquitous.
And we always have been.
Yeah.
We always have been. I was at a book signing event a few weeks ago, and one of the authors, she'd basically made it her business to find every single book she could about women who don't have children. So she wasn't limiting herself to people who chose not to have children, just anything around women that don't have children. And her book is actually called Others Like Me.
Yeah.
So she tells her own story, but she also shares the story of 14 very diverse women who don't have children. And one of the things she delighted in was when she found authors who wrote 100, 200 years ago, who she later discovered didn't have children, and maybe their writing was their work.
Yeah.
So I think there is something about, well, we delete women in history. We delete the achievements of women full stop. Let alone being able to spot the ones that actually had voices and also, by coincidence, also didn't have families.
Yeah. Fee, it's been so fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much for coming in.
It's been an absolute pleasure. As you can tell, I can talk about this for hours. But it's really good to talk about some of these less obvious aspects of not having had children or choosing not to have children. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's been fun.
Oh, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you, of course, to Sharon, as always, for recording and producing this. Thanks for listening.